My wealthy boss gave me his entire estate. Then the daughter who cut me off 10 years ago returned. He had worked for the same man for most of his adult life. Not because he dreamed of climbing ladders or wearing fine suits, but because once he gave his word, he stayed. The job started as something simple, almost temporary. He never imagined it would become the center of his life. Years passed quietly, one after another, marked not by big celebrations but by routines that rarely changed. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. Every morning, he woke before the sun. The alarm clock rang at the same time each day, and he turned it off before it could finish its second ring. He washed his face, looked at himself in the mirror, and nodded as if reminding himself to keep going. His hair had started to thin, and lines sat deeper on his face than they once had. Still, his eyes carried calm rather than bitterness. He dressed neatly but simply. Clean shirt, pressed trousers, shoes polished just enough to show care, not pride. He never wore expensive brands. He believed respect came from actions, not labels. After a small breakfast, usually the same thing every day, he locked his door and stepped into the quiet street. At work, everyone knew him. Not because he demanded attention, but because he was always there. Always on time. Always ready. If something went wrong, people looked for him before anyone else. He fixed problems without drama. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, his words were careful and steady. The wealthy boss trusted him in ways few others were trusted. He handled sensitive tasks, personal errands, and quiet responsibilities that never appeared on paper. When visitors came and things needed to be smooth, he made sure they were. When tempers flared, he stood calmly in the background, steady as a wall. The boss often said, half joking, half serious, that this man was more reliable than family. It was meant as praise, and he accepted it with a small nod. He never asked for more. Never hinted at promotions or rewards. His satisfaction came from knowing he had done his part well. At the end of the workday, he returned home to silence. No television noise greeted him. No voices. Just the soft hum of the city outside his window. His apartment was modest, clean, and carefully arranged. Everything had its place. He liked it that way. There was one framed photo on a shelf. He rarely looked at it directly, but he never moved it either. It showed a younger version of himself standing beside a smiling child. The memory behind it was heavy, but familiar. 10 years ago, his daughter had left. The break was sudden, sharp, and unfinished. Words were said that could not be taken back. Silence followed, growing thicker with each passing year. At first, he wrote messages he never sent. Then letters he never mailed. Eventually, he stopped trying altogether. He never spoke about it at work. Not once. When coworkers shared stories about family gatherings, holidays, and birthdays, he listened politely and smiled when expected. No one suspected how quiet his life truly was. At night, he cooked simple meals and ate alone at the small table by the window. Sometimes he watched people pass by outside. Other times, he read the same old books he had owned for years. He liked stories where people stayed loyal even when it cost them something. He did not complain about loneliness. He told himself he had chosen peace over conflict. That acceptance was better than regret. Still, there were moments when the silence felt too loud. Moments when he wondered if being dependable had slowly erased parts of himself. On weekends, he sometimes went for long walks. He avoided busy places and loud crowds. Parks were his favorite. He sat on benches and watched families pass by, children laughing, parents calling out names. He never stared too long. Just enough to remind himself that life moved forward whether he watched or not. His boss often called him even outside work hours. Not because of emergencies, but because he trusted him. Sometimes it was just to ask for advice. Sometimes it was to share frustrations that could not be shared with others. He listened patiently, never judging, never interrupting. The boss valued loyalty more than anything else. And in that loyalty, the man had found purpose. It filled the space where family once lived. It gave structure to days that might otherwise blur together. Still, there were nights when sleep came slowly. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying old moments. Not arguments, but quiet scenes. A small hand holding his. A laugh in the back seat of a car. A promise made long ago to always be there. He wondered if being dependable for everyone else had left him with nothing for himself. But the thought passed quickly. He had responsibilities. He had a role. He had learned not to ask for more than what was given. Time continued its steady march. Seasons changed. The city aged alongside him. And he remained exactly where he had always been. Reliable. Invisible. Essential. He did not know that the quiet balance of his life was about to shift. That loyalty, the very thing he had built his identity around, would soon place him at the center of something he never expected. For now, though, his world stayed calm. And in that calm, he prepared unknowingly for a truth that had been waiting a long time to surface. The call came early in the morning, earlier than usual. The phone rang while it was still dark outside, the sound cutting sharply through the quiet apartment. He reached for it without thinking, expecting a simple instruction or a small task that needed handling. Instead, the voice on the other end was strained, unfamiliar, and shaking. For a moment, he did not understand the words. They sounded distant, like they were meant for someone else. Ill hospital. Not doing well. He thanked the caller calmly, hung up the phone, and sat on the edge of the bed without moving. His hands rested on his knees. His breathing stayed even, though his chest felt tight. He dressed more quickly than usual, not caring if his shirt was perfectly pressed. As he stepped outside, the air felt heavier. The streets were still quiet, but his mind was loud. He replayed the last conversation he had shared with his boss. Nothing seemed unusual then. No warning. No sign that time was running out. At the hospital, the halls smelled clean and cold. People spoke in low voices. He stood apart from the family members who had gathered, unsure where he belonged. He was not blood. Not officially anything more than an employee. Still, his presence felt necessary, like leaving would be wrong. When the news came, it was brief and final. There was no dramatic scene. No shouting. Just a soft confirmation that the man who had once filled rooms with authority and confidence was gone. The world did not stop, but something inside him did. He nodded when spoken to. He offered quiet support when needed. He did not cry in public. Grief, for him, had always been silent. It settled deep and stayed there, heavy but controlled. The workplace changed overnight. The familiar rhythm was gone. Conversations slowed. People whispered in corners. Some cried openly. Others acted busy, unsure how to sit with loss. The office felt smaller, emptier, as if the walls themselves had lost direction. He continued coming in each day, even when no one asked him to. It felt wrong to stay home. Work had always been his anchor. He organized files, handled small tasks, and helped where he could. No one questioned it. They expected him to be there. During quiet moments, memories surfaced. Not grand ones, but small gestures. A nod of approval. A rare thank you spoken without witnesses. Trust given without conditions. He realized that dignity had been the greatest gift his boss ever offered him. At the memorial service, he stood at the back. He listened as people spoke of success, wealth, and achievements. He clapped politely when appropriate. When it was over, he left quietly, slipping away before anyone could notice his absence. In the days that followed, he assumed his role was finished. He believed loyalty had an end point. A closing chapter marked by respect, perhaps a letter, maybe a small token of appreciation. That was enough. He had never expected more. He packed his work items carefully, returning keys, documents, and anything that no longer belonged to him. Each action felt final, but also strangely peaceful. He told himself he had done his duty. That was all anyone could ask. At home, the silence felt different now. He no longer waited for calls that might come late at night. The routine he had depended on for years had vanished without warning. He filled his time with walks, cleaning, and quiet reflection. There was grief, but also uncertainty. Without the structure of work, old thoughts returned. Regrets he had buried resurfaced. Questions about the choices he had made, the sacrifices he never acknowledged. He wondered if his life had become too small, if being dependable had slowly replaced being present for himself. Still, he pushed those thoughts aside. Loss was not the time for self-pity. One afternoon, a letter arrived. He assumed it was administrative, something routine. He placed it on the table and made tea before opening it. His hands were steady as he read the first line. It was brief, formal. It asked him to attend a meeting regarding his former employer's affairs. No explanation. No hint of importance. He folded the letter and set it down, puzzled but calm. He did not imagine that this meeting would change anything. He expected paperwork. Maybe a final acknowledgement of service. A polite goodbye. As the days passed, the weight of grief softened into something quieter. Acceptance, perhaps. He reminded himself that life moved forward, even when people did not want it to. He prepared for the meeting as he always prepared for work. Clean clothes. Simple shoes. No expectations. He did not rehearse speeches or imagine outcomes. Hope had never been part of his routine. On the morning of the meeting, he paused before leaving his apartment. He looked once at the framed photo on the shelf. The past and present seemed closer than usual, pressing in from both sides. He locked the door behind him, unaware that the chapter he believed had ended was only beginning. What he thought was a quiet farewell was about to become something far more complicated, and far more personal. The meeting took place in a quiet office that smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. He arrived early as he always did, and sat in the chair closest to the door. His hands rested on his lap. His posture was straight, but his shoulders felt heavier than usual. Across the table sat two lawyers. Their expressions were calm, professional, and unreadable. Files were stacked neatly in front of them. Everything about the room felt controlled, measured, and serious. It made him uneasy. He assumed this would be simple. A signature. A final form. Maybe a small envelope with a thank you letter inside. He had already prepared himself for closure. One of the lawyers cleared his throat and began to speak. The words were formal, careful, and slow. He listened politely at first, nodding out of habit. Then a sentence landed differently than the rest. It made his breath catch. He thought he had misunderstood. The lawyer repeated the line, this time more clearly. Then another followed. And another. Each one pressed harder than the last. The estate. The properties. The accounts. The authority. All entrusted to him. For a long moment, the room seemed to tilt. He felt warm, then cold. His ears rang softly, like distant noise from a crowded street. He stared at the table, afraid that if he looked up, he might lose balance. He shook his head slowly. There had to be a mistake. He was only an employee. A helper. Someone who followed instructions. He had never asked for ownership, never expected recognition beyond respect. The lawyers explained patiently. This decision had not been sudden. It was not emotional or impulsive. Documents were pulled forward. Dates. Signatures. Revisions made over years, not days. Each change deliberate. Each choice intentional. They spoke of trust. Of consistency. Of loyalty proven not once, but repeatedly, without demand or condition. He listened, but the words felt unreal. He wanted to interrupt, to correct them, to hand everything back across the table. His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. One lawyer asked if he was feeling unwell. He nodded slightly, though he did not know what he felt. Shock sat heavy in his chest. Confusion followed close behind. He was given water. He accepted it with a trembling hand. The glass felt too fragile, like it might shatter if he held it too tightly. They continued explaining responsibilities. Legal obligations. Maintenance. Oversight. The tone was respectful, almost cautious, as if they understood the weight of what was being placed on him. He barely heard those parts. All he could think was why. Why him? He had done his job. That was all. He had shown up. He had stayed. He had listened. None of that felt deserving of a lifetime of wealth. When the meeting ended, he stood slowly. The lawyers offered their hands. He shook them politely, his grip unsure. Papers were placed into a folder and handed to him. It felt far too heavy for paper alone. Outside, the air felt sharper. The street noise returned, loud and busy, as if nothing had changed. People walked past him without looking. Cars moved. Life continued. He stood still for several minutes, holding the folder against his chest. He did not go home right away. He walked. Down familiar streets. Past places he had visited 100 times before. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right. That night, sleep refused to come. He sat at the small table in his apartment, papers spread out carefully. He read them slowly, line by line, afraid to miss something important. The language was formal, but the meaning was clear. It was real. His hands shook as he folded the documents back into the folder. He placed it on the shelf beside the framed photo. The past and the future sat side by side, both silent. The next day, whispers began. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quiet questions. Curious looks. Polite conversations that paused when he entered the room. Someone had talked. Information had traveled. He felt eyes on him in places he had always been invisible. People greeted him differently now. Some with forced smiles. Some with careful distance. He did not know how to respond. He dressed the same. Spoke the same. Walked the same route to work, even though his role there had changed. Inside, he felt like a guest in his own life. Messages arrived. Emails. Calls from people he barely remembered. Old connections suddenly warm again. He answered politely, briefly. He trusted none of it. At night, doubt crept in. What if he failed? What if he made the wrong decision? What if he did not belong in this world at all? He thought of the boss. Of quiet conversations. Of trust given without explanation. Of responsibility accepted without reward. He realized then that the inheritance was not just wealth. It was expectation. A belief that he would continue what had been built, with the same care and integrity. That frightened him more than money ever could. Days passed, and the news continued spreading, still quietly, but steadily. The world adjusted faster than he could. People had already formed opinions about who he was now. He had not. One evening, as he returned home, he stopped in front of his door and rested his forehead against the wood. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, his life had opened instead of narrowed. He did not know how to step into it. He unlocked the door and entered the familiar silence. But this time, it felt different. Heavier. Full of questions. He sat down and stared at the framed photo longer than usual. The person he used to be and the person he might become felt very far apart. He whispered softly, to no one in particular, that he hoped he would not disappoint. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, everything had changed. The truth was out now. And with it came a future he never asked for, but could no longer avoid. The first message arrived without warning. No knock. No call. Just a quiet notification on his phone late in the evening. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another formal email or a delayed response to something he barely remembered sending. But when he saw the name, his body reacted before his mind could. His hand tightened around the phone. His chest felt suddenly small, as if the room had lost air. It had been 10 years. The message was short, polite, careful. It said she hoped he was well, that she had heard about recent events, that she thought it might be time to talk, if he was open to it. No apology. No explanation. Just words placed gently, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. He read it once. Then again. Then a third time. Each reading brought back a different memory. A voice. A door closing. Silence that stretched longer than either of them expected. He set the phone down and stared at the wall. The apartment felt smaller than usual. The familiar quiet now carried weight. He had imagined this moment many times over the years. In those imagined versions, the timing was always different. The emotions were louder. The words were clearer. He was never prepared for how calm it actually felt. Or how tired. He did not respond that night. Sleep came late, if at all. His thoughts drifted backward, uninvited. He remembered arguments that had started small and grown sharp. Expectations that were never spoken clearly. A sense that he was always choosing stability over understanding. He remembered the day she left. The final conversation had been brief. Too brief. Both of them had been guarded, afraid of saying the wrong thing, and somehow managed to say nothing that mattered. The next morning, he went about his routine as usual. Same clothes. Same breakfast. Same walk. But everything felt slightly off, like a familiar song played at the wrong speed. At work, people continued treating him differently. With caution. With curiosity. With assumptions they did not bother hiding very well. He noticed how quickly attention shifted when he entered a room. How conversations paused and resumed after he passed. By midday, the message still sat unanswered. He told himself timing did not matter. That the past could not be measured against recent changes. But even as he thought it, he knew that timing mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. That afternoon, another message arrived. This one longer. Still polite. Still distant. She wrote that she was in town. That she had not planned to stay long. That she understood if he did not want to meet. He closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. The word town echoed in his mind. So close. Yet so far. He thought about all the years that had passed without contact. Birthdays he had marked quietly on a calendar. Messages he had typed and deleted. The careful decision to give space, even when it hurt. He wondered if she had thought of him at all during that time. Or if he had simply faded into the background of her life. That evening, he finally replied. His response was brief. He said he was open to meeting. That he did not know what to expect, but he believed conversation was better than silence. He suggested a public place. Neutral. Simple. The reply came quickly. She agreed. They met 2 days later. He arrived early, of course. He chose a seat near the window and folded his hands on the table. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. Not weak. Just worn. When she arrived, he recognized her instantly, even though she had changed. Older. More guarded. Her posture was careful, like someone used to standing alone. They exchanged polite greetings. Nothing more. She thanked him for meeting her. He nodded. Words felt unnecessary at first. They talked about small things. Weather. Travel. Work. Topics that filled space without touching anything real. He listened closely, noticing the pauses in her speech. The way she avoided certain subjects without naming them. Eventually, silence settled between them. She was the one who broke it. She said she knew the timing looked bad. That she did not want him to think she had come only because of what he had received. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands rested tightly in her lap. He believed she believed that. But belief and certainty were different things. He did not accuse her. He did not ask questions that felt like traps. He simply said the timing was difficult, not impossible. That answer seemed to surprise her. She spoke then of distance, of needing time back then, of choices she made without knowing how long silence could last. She did not justify everything. She did not deny pain. She spoke carefully, as if testing each sentence before letting it go. He listened. Listening had always been easier than speaking. When it was his turn, he struggled. Not because he lacked words, but because he had too many. He spoke of routine, of quiet years, of learning to accept unanswered questions. He did not mention the inheritance. Not directly. She noticed anyway. She asked how he was handling everything. The responsibilities, the attention, the change. He answered honestly. He said he felt unprepared, that nothing about his life had trained him for being seen. She nodded slowly. They sat with that truth. When they parted, there was no resolution. No dramatic moment. Just an agreement to talk again. A shared understanding that the past had not disappeared, only waited. As he walked home, old emotions stirred. Hope, cautious and small. Doubt, familiar and sharp. He wondered whether reconnection was possible without reopening wounds. At home, he stood by the shelf and looked at the framed photo. For the first time, it did not feel frozen in time. The past had moved. And it had found him. He did not know yet whether it had come to heal or to test him. But he knew one thing clearly. Silence was no longer an option. The inheritance had changed how the world saw him. But her return had changed how he saw himself. And the questions he had buried for a decade were finally asking to be answered. They met again a few days later. This time, the place was quieter, almost too quiet. The kind of space where every word felt louder than it should. He arrived early as always, and chose a seat that faced the door. It gave him a sense of control, even if he did not fully understand why he needed it. When she walked in, her smile was polite but measured. It did not reach her eyes. She greeted him with a soft voice and sat across from him, placing her bag carefully at her feet. Everything about her movements felt deliberate. They began with small talk again. How the city had changed. How busy life felt lately. How strange it was to reconnect after so long. The words flowed easily, but none of them carried weight. Eventually, he asked her how she had been during the years they did not speak. She paused before answering. She said life had been difficult. That she had gone through things she was not ready to explain. That she had felt hurt and misunderstood back then, and distance had seemed like the only option. Her tone was calm, almost practiced. He listened without interrupting. He nodded when it felt appropriate. He did not challenge her words, even when they stayed vague. He had learned long ago that pushing too hard only caused people to retreat further. Still, something felt missing. She spoke of pain, but not of responsibility. Of struggle but not of choices. The years between them were reduced to general phrases that explained everything and nothing at the same time. When he gently asked what had hurt her most, she shifted in her chair. Her answer came quickly, too quickly. She said it was complicated. That there had been many small things. That blame did not matter anymore. He accepted that answer on the surface. Inside, he felt a familiar tightening. The conversation moved forward, but the distance between them remained. Each sentence felt like it had been carefully edited before being spoken. He wondered how many thoughts stayed hidden behind polite smiles. Then the topic changed. She mentioned the inheritance casually, as if it were just another detail in his life. She asked how overwhelming it must be. How unexpected. Her voice softened, but her posture changed. He noticed it immediately. Her questions became more specific. The properties. The responsibilities. Whether he planned to keep everything or make changes. She spoke gently, but her interest felt sharper. He answered briefly. He said he was still adjusting, that he had not made decisions yet, that he was taking things slowly. She nodded, but her eyes stayed focused. He did not accuse her of anything. He did not point out the shift in tone. But he felt it clearly. The conversation had gained an edge. For the first time since she returned, he felt guarded. She spoke about how difficult life had been financially at times, how unstable things could feel without support. She did not ask for help directly. She did not need to. He listened, his expression calm. Inside, doubt grew. He asked himself whether this conversation would have happened if his life had not changed. If silence would have remained easier without the inheritance. He hated that thought. He wanted to believe her return came from something deeper. From regret. From reflection. But trust, once broken, did not rebuild itself on hope alone. When the conversation ended, she thanked him again for meeting her. She said she was glad they were talking now, that it felt like a step forward. He agreed, but his voice lacked certainty. As they parted, he felt tired in a way rest could not fix. Emotional effort weighed heavier than physical work ever had. Walking home, he replayed the conversation in his mind. Not the words themselves, but the pauses between them. The careful phrasing. The moments where honesty almost surfaced, then disappeared. At home, he sat alone and stared at the quiet room. He realized that loyalty had trained him to listen patiently, but it had not taught him how to protect himself. He did not regret meeting her. He did not regret opening the door. But he no longer trusted that politeness meant sincerity. The inheritance had changed the shape of their conversations, whether either of them admitted it or not. He understood now that rebuilding a relationship required more than shared history. It required accountability, and that was something she had not yet offered. He placed his phone face down on the table and took a slow breath. For the first time since her return, he allowed himself to accept a difficult truth. Reconnection did not always mean reconciliation. And trust, once fractured, did not return simply because time had passed. The silence between them had ended, but the distance remained. After their last meeting, he did not reach out again right away. He needed time. Not to plan words or prepare arguments, but to sit with what he felt without reacting to it. Silence, once painful, now felt necessary. He returned to his routines. Early mornings. Long walks. Quiet meals. But his thoughts were different now. More honest. Less forgiving of comfort. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to look back without defending his choices. He admitted to himself that he had not always been easy to live with. That stability had mattered to him more than expression. That he often chose calm over conversation, work over listening. He had believed providing was enough. He had believed being dependable spoke louder than words. Sometimes it had. Sometimes it had not. He remembered moments when she had tried to speak and he had brushed them aside, not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. He had told himself there would be time later. Later had never come. He also remembered her decisions. The sharp finality of leaving. The years of silence that followed. The choice to disappear completely rather than return with questions or honesty. Pain explained some things. It did not excuse everything. Both truths existed at the same time. That realization settled something inside him. Reconciliation, he understood now, was not about proving worth or offering repair through sacrifice. It was about two people choosing responsibility at the same time. And that could not be forced. A message came from her a week later. Friendly. Casual. She suggested meeting again. No urgency. No depth. He read it slowly. Then he replied. He agreed to meet. When they sat across from each other this time, the atmosphere felt different. Still polite, but clearer. He did not rush into conversation. He waited until the moment felt right. When he spoke, his voice was calm. He told her he had spent time thinking, not only about the past, but about what both of them expected now. He said he understood hurt and confusion. He acknowledged where he had failed to listen, where he had chosen routine over connection. She seemed surprised by that. He did not stop there. He told her that silence had been a choice on both sides. That distance, once chosen, carried consequences no amount of time could erase. He said he was open to rebuilding something, but not pretending nothing had happened. There was no accusation in his tone. Intentionally, peacefully. He learned that second chances were not always about repairing broken relationships. Sometimes they existed to correct how one treated oneself. The world often believed happiness came from gain. He learned it came from clarity, from knowing what to hold and what to release. In the end, the greatest inheritance was not property or wealth. It was freedom. Freedom from guilt. Freedom from expectation. Freedom to live with dignity, without asking permission. And that lesson, once learned, stayed with him quietly, just like loyalty always had.